You won't believe this. One of the world's biggest fashion empires started with a broke teenager who dropped out of school at 14. No money, no diploma, no future, or so they said. And yet, that kid built Vans, a billion-dollar empire. That rewrote global culture. What no one tells you is that behind every Vans sneaker lies a shocking story of risk, resilience, and near collapse. This isn't the polished fairy tale. This is the raw truth revealed: the bankruptcies, the hidden lessons, the moment it almost didn't work. And here's the secret behind it. The same principles that lifted Vans from a tiny Anaheim shop to a worldwide icon can be applied to your own life. That's why I've put together an exclusive guide with 10 powerful lessons from stories like this. You'll find the link in the description. It's the playbook no one gives you. So buckle up. Because what really happened to Paul Van Doren isn't just about shoes, it's about survival, vision, and building something so authentic it couldn't be ignored. This changed everything. And it all began with one boy, in the middle of the Great Depression, who had no idea the world would one day know his name. Humble roots during the Great Depression, Paul Van Doren was born into a world that seemed rigged against him. The Great Depression had drained entire communities, leaving families to scrape by with whatever they could. His father, a quiet inventor, would spend late nights tinkering with tools and sketches that rarely paid the bills. His mother, a seamstress, stitched clothes with worn hands just to keep food on the table. It wasn't the glamorous beginning of a business icon, far from it. And yet, you won't believe this. From this very struggle would emerge a story that would one day shape global culture. Before we dive deeper, I've put together an exclusive guide with 10 hidden lessons from the world's most powerful business empires. You'll find the link in the description. It's a companion to this story, designed to help you see the secret behind it all, the part no one tells you. Because as we unpack Paul's early life, you'll start noticing patterns, the kind that repeat in every great empire, whether it's fashion, food, or footwear. Now, let's get back to the boy in Depression-era Massachusetts who had no idea what was coming. At school, Paul didn't fit in. Numbers and letters on a chalkboard felt meaningless compared to the real problems waiting. At home, he wasn't a dropout because of laziness. He was a dropout because life demanded it. At just 14 years old, he walked away from formal education. Think about that. While other kids were memorizing history dates, Paul was about to write history himself. The truth revealed is that sometimes the system pushes you out just so you can build your own. With nothing but grit, Paul found his way into a shoe factory. The machines were loud, the hours were long, and the work was grueling. But for Paul, it was more than a paycheck, it was training ground. He learned how canvas bent under pressure, how rubber gripped against concrete, and how design wasn't just about style, but survival. What no one tells you is that these moments, sweeping floors, cutting scraps, fixing mistakes, were the foundation for billion-dollar innovation. Imagine being a teenager surrounded by men twice your age, each with hardened hands and stories of survival. Instead of being crushed by it, Paul absorbed it all. He learned discipline from the clock, precision from the machines, and resilience from the workers who never complained despite aching backs. This changed everything for him. Most people would have seen a dead-end factory job. Paul saw a classroom, a hidden lesson disguised as labor. It could have ended here. He could have stayed a nameless worker, punching in and out of shifts, trapped in the same cycle as millions of others. But Paul Van Doren wasn't wired that way. Deep inside, he carried his father's inventiveness and his mother's quiet determination. And while no one saw it coming, those roots in hardship would one day fuel an empire that stretched far beyond the walls of that factory. First venture, Randy's apprenticeship's next chapter began at Randy's, a shoe company that on the surface looked like just another workplace, but this wasn't just a job. It was a laboratory of opportunity, a place where he discovered the mechanics behind every sole, stitch, and seam. Here, Paul wasn't just making shoes, he was dissecting an industry. And no one saw it coming. The dropout kid was quietly becoming a master of his craft. Day after day, he rotated through roles, sewing canvas, cutting patterns, molding rubber, and assembling shoes piece by piece. By the time most apprentices had specialized in one corner of the factory, Paul understood the entire process end to end. The truth revealed here is simple. When you learn every angle of a business, you're no longer replaceable, you're building something no one can take from you perspective. But it wasn't just the technical know-how. Paul noticed how management treated workers and how morale directly shaped the quality of the product. If people felt overlooked, their work showed it. If they felt respected, they delivered magic. This hidden lesson would later define his own empire. He began to believe in a simple but radical philosophy: put people first, and the business will follow. It wasn't just theory, he was living the proof every day. Think about it. How many companies collapse because they ignore their own teams? Paul saw that mistake happening in real time, and he quietly promised himself he'd never run a business that way. That's where the real what no one tells you lies. Success isn't just about products, it's about people. He understood early that loyalty isn't bought, it's built. And this changed everything about how he would one day lead. By the way, this connects to one of the core principles I've included in the exclusive guide I mentioned earlier. Inside, you'll see how history's greatest empires, from fashion houses to tech giants, leaned on this same people-first mindset. It's a principle you can apply today, whether you're running a small team, a startup, or just beginning your journey. Don't underestimate it. It almost didn't work for many who ignored it. For Paul, Randy's wasn't the end game. It was the training ground that prepared him for something much bigger. With every pair of shoes he touched, every worker he spoke to, every system he observed, he was building not just skill but vision. And while it could have ended here, buried inside the walls of Randy's, Paul was already dreaming of something radical, something no one else dared to attempt. Founding the Doren Rubber Company Vans, it was 1966 in Anaheim, California. The world was buzzing with change, rock music, counterculture, rebellion, but for Paul Van Doren, the revolution started with shoes. Together with his brother James and partners Gordon Lee and Serge Delia, he launched what seemed like an impossible idea: a store that didn't just sell shoes, but actually made them on site. No one saw it coming. This wasn't business as usual, it was disruption before the word even existed. On opening day, something almost laughable happened. They had no inventory, zero. Customers walked in, picked styles, placed their orders, and walked out with nothing but a promise. And here's the shocking story. Those same customers returned the next day, paid in full, and walked away proudly, wearing their new shoes. What really happened that day wasn't just a sale, it was the birth of trust. That trust became the DNA of Vans. This model flipped the industry upside down. While competitors mass-produced and stockpiled, Paul and his team tailored demand in real time. Each order was a handshake agreement with the community, and each delivery felt personal. You won't believe this, but that scrappy system became the foundation for an empire worth billions. It almost didn't work, but sometimes risk is the only way forward. The truth revealed is that great businesses often begin in chaos, not perfection. Vans wasn't polished, it wasn't slick, but it was real. Customers weren't just buying shoes, they were buying into a story, into a culture that valued them as more than transactions. And the hidden lesson: people will forgive imperfections if you give them authenticity. That's a business rule most never learn until it's too late. Here's where you can apply it to your own life. Don't wait until everything is perfect to start. Paul didn't. If he had waited for a flawless launch, Vans would never exist. And this is a principle I dive deeper into inside the exclusive guide I created. It shows how many legendary founders launched messy, unfinished, even risky, but turned it into unstoppable success. That guide is your map to seeing the pattern behind every overnight empire. By the end of that first day, Paul Van Doren wasn't just running a shoe store, he was building a movement. The Anaheim shop was small, rough around the edges, but alive with possibility. No one in that crowd of customers knew it yet, but they were stepping into history that would echo from skate parks to fashion runways, from California's sidewalks to global stages. It could have ended here, but instead, it was just the beginning. Early innovation and customization shoe companies in the 1960s followed one formula: make as many pairs as possible, ship them out, and hope people bought them. But Paul Van Doren thought differently. From day one, Vans became a laboratory of ideas. If someone asked for a custom color, they made it. If someone needed a replacement for just the left shoe, they sold it. What really happened here wasn't just sales, it was respect for the customer's voice. And you won't believe this, that single choice rewired the entire relationship between brand and beer. The truth revealed is that innovation doesn't always come from high-tech labs or million-dollar campaigns. Sometimes it comes from listening. Vans built loyalty by doing what no one else dared to do, saying yes when others said impossible. Selling a single shoe might sound crazy, but to a kid who wore out just one from skating every day, it was life-changing. That hidden lesson: the details matter more than you think. Imagine walking into a store and feeling like your opinion shaped the product. That's what customers felt at Vans. They weren't just consumers, they were co-creators. It almost didn't work because customization meant extra effort, but the payoff was undeniable. Every unique pair that left the shop carried a story, and those stories traveled further than any advertisement could. Paul wasn't just building shoes, he was building community. Word spread through neighborhoods, skate parks, and schools that Vans wasn't just another brand, it was your brand. No one saw it coming, but this culture of customization turned local customers into evangelists. Each pair became a walking billboard of loyalty, and loyalty spreads faster than money can buy. And here's something to think about. What no one tells you is that customization doesn't only apply to business, it applies to your own journey. Tailoring your path to your strengths, your style, your needs, that's how you build something uncheckable. In the exclusive guide I've shared, I break down how legendary companies used personalization to build billion-dollar empires. It's the kind of insight that can change how you approach your own goals. By choosing to innovate through listening, Vans created more than a product, they created belonging. The Anaheim shop became a hub where individuality wasn't just accepted, it was celebrated, and that changed everything. It could have ended here as a quirky little store with unusual policies, but instead it was the spark that would ignite Vans into becoming the heartbeat of a culture that was just about to explode. Growing through skateboard culture by the mid-1970s, something unexpected was happening on the streets of Southern California. A new culture was rising, raw, rebellious, and louder than anything before it. Skateboarders weren't just kids playing in empty pools. They were pioneers carving a lifestyle from concrete. And here's the shocking story: while big brands ignored them, Vans leaned in. No one saw it coming, but this connection would turn a small shoe company into a cultural phenomenon. Skaters loved Vans for a simple reason: grip. The sticky rubber soles clung to boards better than anything else on the market. They didn't slip, they didn't crack under pressure, and they held up against the daily punishment of tricks and falls. For Paul, this wasn't luck, it was design meeting need. What really happened was that a product built for everyday wear became the secret weapon of an underground sport. Paul didn't just watch from the sidelines. He stepped right into the culture. He sponsored young skaters like Tony Alver and Stacy Peralta, listening to them, co-creating with them. The result? The Vans era, a shoe designed with input from those very athletes. This changed everything. Suddenly, Vans wasn't just footwear, it was a badge of identity. You weren't just wearing shoes, you were wearing rebellion. And then came the checkerboard pattern, the bold off-the-wall slogan symbols that weren't manufactured in a boardroom, but born directly from the streets. That's the truth revealed. Authentic brands don't create culture, they amplify it. Vans became the megaphone for skater identity, and in return, skaters carried Vans into the spotlight. It almost didn't work, but risk turned into resonance. Think about your own life. How often do we overlook the subcultures around us? Sometimes the hidden lesson is that success isn't found in the mainstream, but in the overlooked corners, where passion burns the brightest. And this is exactly the kind of principle I break down inside the exclusive guide showing how empire builders spotted opportunity in the margins before the rest of the world caught on. It's what no one tells you, but it's everything. By the end of the decade, Vans wasn't just a shoe anymore, it was a statement. Skate parks, sidewalks, music festivals all pulsed with the off-the-wall energy. What began in a small Anaheim shop had become inseparable from a movement that was rewriting youth culture. It could have ended here as just a trend, but instead, it was the chapter that cemented Vans into history. Scars of bankruptcy and rebirth 1980s should have been a victory lap for Vans. The brand had conquered skate parks, music scenes, and California's sidewalks. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. Counterfeit products flooded the market, eating away at sales. Expansion was too fast, too wide, too heavy. And here's the shocking story. In 1984, Vans filed for bankruptcy protection. What really happened wasn't a failure of shoes, it was the weight of growth gone wrong. For Paul Van Doren, this was more than numbers on a balance sheet. It was personal. The empire he had built with his bare hands was crumbling, and people whispered that it was over. You won't believe this, but bankruptcy nearly erased Vans from history. It almost didn't work. Factories slowed, trust wavered, and even loyal fans feared the end. The truth revealed is brutal. Every empire faces a breaking point, but Paul wasn't wired to quit. He returned to the basics, cutting costs, focusing on core models, and rebuilding the trust that started back in Anaheim. Instead of chasing growth, he doubled down on resilience. That hidden lesson: when the storm comes, survival isn't about being flashy, it's about being grounded. And slowly, painfully, Vans began to rise again. Think about this in your own life. How many times do we push so hard for expansion that we forget the foundation? What no one tells you is that collapse often carries the blueprint for rebirth. Paul discovered that in failure lived the seed of reinvention. This changed everything, not just for him, but for the brand. And this is where I want to remind you. Inside the exclusive guide I put together, I break down exactly how iconic companies turned bankruptcy, lawsuits, and near collapse into comebacks stronger than ever. These hidden lessons are the kind of playbook most people never see. It's what separates those who fade from those who fight back. By the late 80s, Vans had survived. Scarred, smaller, but alive, and those scars became part of its authenticity. When fans laced up a pair, they weren't just wearing shoes, they were wearing resilience. It could have ended here, with Vans as a cautionary tale. But instead, it was the turning point that prepared the brand for something far greater: global icon status. Global expansion and cultural icon status. By the 1990s, Vans was no longer just surviving, it was thriving. The scars of bankruptcy gave the brand grit, but its spirit gave it wings. Vans became more than footwear. It became shorthand for a lifestyle. You won't believe this. A shoe once made for California skaters was suddenly spotted in Tokyo, Paris, London, proof that rebellion had gone global. What really happened wasn't marketing magic. It was authenticity scaling itself. The turning point came with the slip-on. Lightweight, easy, and timeless. It wasn't just a shoe, it was a cultural signal. And then, one unforgettable moment: Fast Times at Ridgemont High. A goofy character named Jeff Spickley, played by Sean Penn, walked onto the screen in black and white checkerboard Vans. No one saw it coming, but that scene immortalized the shoe. Overnight, Vans wasn't just on feet, it was on film, forever. From there, expansion felt unstoppable. Music festivals, punk shows, BMX parks. Vans wasn't chasing trends, it was setting them. The truth revealed is that when culture adopts your product, growth becomes organic. Vans didn't have to force its way into closets. People begged for it because wearing Vans meant belonging to something bigger than fashion, it meant belonging to a movement. The brand's bold, off-the-wall ethos resonated across borders. It wasn't just about skating anymore, it was about daring to be different. That hidden lesson: the strongest brands transcend their product. They become belief systems. Vans became rebellion, freedom, and creativity in shoe form. And that changed everything, not just for the company, but for the people who wore them. Here's where it ties back to you. What no one tells you is that global success isn't about appealing to everyone, it's about speaking so honestly to someone that the whole world eventually notices. That principle, broken down step by step,